Hey gardeners, this is Jeff with Whirlwind Family Farm, and today we're going to look at tomato plants and really try to simplify it for you. Maybe this is something you're trying for the very first time, and you may be interested in a determinate tomato or an indeterminate tomato, and that's what we're going to look at today. Directly behind me is indeterminate tomatoes, and just as the name says, they're going to grow very tall, 8, 9, 10 foot tall. They have to be trellised. In this case, we have them inside of a high tunnel where they're supported on a trellising system, but you can also have them outside with an open air trellising system, so that'll work as well. But in order for these indeterminates to be as productive as possible, they've got to be pruned properly, and that's what we're going to show you how to do step by step. It's not as hard as it sounds. And then we'll also take a quick look at the determinate tomato, and that may be right for you as well. So stick with us. We'll take a quick look. We'll take the camera in close, and you can actually see exactly how they're raised and how they're pruned. So all right, now let's take a look at determinate tomatoes, and just as the name states, they're determinate. They don't get much bigger than a bush, and they're pretty easy to maintain. My suggestion on most determinate tomatoes is there's not a lot of pruning that needs to be done. One thing I would say down on the lower branches, if you have a lot that is laying down on the ground, just as I do have some here, you want to come in and trim those up because you can tend to get some disease or leaf blight down when it's touching the ground. So in the case of determinate tomatoes, that's really all I do is I'll come in and clean them up and tidy this up and clean around the bottoms, so you just have a much better, more productive determinate tomato. The determinate tomatoes, they tend to produce in a 3 to 4 week period, and then they're done. So the advantage of that is you can have various types, maybe start one a little bit early, go a few weeks later, and really set those up at different times during the spring and through the summer. And they require less maintenance and less time versus an indeterminate, which has to be pruned, which we'll look at next. But that's basically the determinate type of tomato. And again, my suggestion is, and we can do other videos on that, but just coming in and cleaning up those lower branches that are down touching the ground. This particular row of tomatoes of indeterminates, we have them interplanted with carrots, so it's a good use of space. The other suggestion I would say is some sort of support system, just so they're not laying down or falling on the ground. You're keeping those determinates upright. So there's your determinate tomato. Now let's go over and see how to prune a indeterminate tomato. Okay, now we've stepped into the high tunnel where we have some indeterminate tomatoes. On this side, over on the right side, we have cherry tomatoes, and over here we have more of the big beefs and estivas, the larger type of tomato. So let's take a quick look. How do we prune? How do we keep indeterminate tomatoes producing at the very best that they can? And that's the key. If we don't go in and prune indeterminate tomatoes, they're not going to produce the fruit, those tomatoes that you would expect of them. The very first year I did this, I made the mistake of not pruning indeterminate tomatoes, and it was a whole lot of greenery, whole lot of leaves, and very few tomatoes. The next year when I did it, applying the practices of pruning, had far better production because instead of all the energy going into leaves, it was going into fruit. So let's take a quick look of exactly how we prune indeterminate tomatoes. For one of the first things I'm going to say, and I am not a mathematician by any stretch of imagination, but they talk about the Fibonacci spiral, and most plants or trees or anything tend to grow in this spiral where each of the sun leaves is actually being exposed to sun. So that's the Fibonacci spiral. So keeping that in mind, that's one of the things that we're keeping in mind as we prune. Also, the other thing to keep in mind is we're pruning to a single leader. So from down to the root or to the ground, all the way to the very top, this plant is going to be pruned to an absolute single leader all the way from top to bottom. Now, what's the key? We're looking for those that are sun leaves, which we definitely want to leave alone, keep them in place. But anytime we prune an indeterminate, the key is start at the bottom. So if we look at this particular plant, let's just make this simple. We're going to come in and we already see some of these leaves and some of these sun leaves that are down low, and they're not serving any purpose at this point. So we're going to come in and we're going to prune each of those off to get it up and off the ground. And we're going to do the same thing with these sun leaves. As this plant starts to produce, the leaves that are down lower, if they're touching the ground or they're no longer getting the sun that these upper leaves would be, as these plants grow, we'll do a hard pruning and actually take those off. But first, let's look at where we're going to actually get rid of those suckers. So we come up, as we said, we always start at the bottom. We see that we have got branches out here that we don't need sun leaves. So let's work our way up. We work our way up. We see that in the past I have pruned these. And so we're looking for suckers, and they're going to be right where the branch or the sun leaf goes out, or some people say right in that crotch area is where you're going to find them. So you come up, and what do we find right here is we see a sucker. And one of the things you'll see is it tends to be a little bit of a curly leaf like that. And in this case, it's so small, I can actually take my finger and just pinch that sucker out. So they typically are right there in that little cleft area. Sometimes they'll be up a little bit higher. So let's go up to the top. Now the key with an indeterminate plant is the last thing we want to do is top it. So the very top of this is where you have the growing cluster or the little floral that's here. And you also see the fruit or the blooms that are actually in place. But as we come down, also you'll notice we're already seeing a sucker that's in place right there. And how do we know that that's a sucker? Is because it's down from where the flower is. Here is the sun leaves, and it's right there in that place. Now, if it's at the top, sometimes I may leave those for almost a week, because if something happened to happen to the top of this, this could take over as the top of that indeterminate. But in this case, as we move up, we can always know if we move up and see those flowering that this is going to be the main stem. That's the key to tell you. These suckers can go out and eventually have their own flowers that come on, but that's going to be much further down, and we're going to show you an example of that. So I'm going to go ahead and clip that sucker off. So let's come down, and here's one that's actually a better example. On this tomato plant, we pruned it to a single leader, and as I'm looking down here, I see a sucker that since the last time I pruned has come in. You can see that it has a little bit of a curl to it, so we can just pinch that out. Let's work our way up the plant. There we see a set of fruit. We still have the single leader, and we come up and, oh wait, what is that right there? Okay, if we look at this closely, you can see that it has a little bit of that curled leaf right in there. There is nothing blooming, no fruit coming off that. But if we follow our main stem and come up, we'll see there's fruit. So we know that this is our main stem as we work all the way to the top. So as we come back down, right here in that intersection between the sun leaf and the main branch or the main stem is a sucker. So it's a little bit big, so I don't want to go in and pinch that out. Sometimes if you pinch something too big, they can tear a little bit. So we're actually going to come in very carefully and prune that out. So just to review, anytime we come up to an indeterminate, we're going to always start at the bottom, and we'll find one of our indeterminates right here. We're going to start at the bottom, see what needs to be taken off, and in this case, we would come in. This needs to be pruned off. It's down low. It's not serving any purpose here by the ground, and I'm just going to pinch that one off. As we come up, we actually see a little bit of a sucker forming right there. We come up, and this plant has been pruned fairly well, and we come all the way to the top. And that's it. With your indeterminates, you just want to make sure each week, go out, take that view and look down, start at the bottom. We see a branch here, for example, that doesn't need to be there, and just follow it straight up and look for those suckers right there, usually in that, where that sun leaf branches off. So that's basically all you have to do with your indeterminates. Keep it down to a single liter. There are people who do a double liter, but it's so much simpler. And I get a lot of production off these single liters. So let's take one more quick look. Okay, now you can make a decision on which tomato plant is right for you. Remember, the determinant is going to be smaller. It's going to be less work in pruning, but you're only going to get about 3 to 4 weeks of production. And you can stagger the growth. You can plant one a little earlier, a little later, one of your plants. You can do cherry or full-size tomatoes in the indeterminate. And again, you're just going to be clipping and pruning up around the bottom, which that's all you need to do, just to allow airflow and none of those leaves touching the ground. The indeterminate, of course, is going to take more time, more effort. You're going to have a trellising system, whether inside or an outside trellising system. We want to keep them to a central leader from top to bottom. And one of the keys that you want to be sure and very, very careful not to do, the very top of these indeterminates is where it grows. And so they're going to go all the way up to 9, 10 foot tall in certain circumstances. If you ever happen to top it, that plant is probably done. Sometimes you can have a sucker that will come off the side and it can take over as the main leader, but to be careful. And that's why when you start at the bottom and you see those branches and in between where the suckers are, that's where you prune. Always go up the leader, and as you start to see the flower or the fruit, you know that you're on the main stem. So that's really it. I will tell you that our indeterminates last year went all the way to the first frost. And we do get frost in these high tunnels. Eventually it does happen in here as well. So we went all the way to October with these. And as you start to look back on these indeterminates, we're already starting to get some production of our tomatoes. So that's it. That's your decision, indeterminate or determinate. I hope that you find the one that fits well for you and you get exactly the tomatoes you're looking for and great production. It helps the channel. We hope that you will like, subscribe, hit the bell for notification, because we're going to have a lot more content coming throughout the year, throughout this summer. Thanks. This is Jeff from Whirlwind Family Farm. Talk to you soon.